The gavel cracked against the wooden bench like a gunshot, cutting through the hum of whispered anticipation. Judge Beryl Howell's eyes narrowed, her voice dripping with condescension as she leaned forward. "Congresswoman Crockett," she said, her tone sharp enough to slice through steel, "you will remember your place in this chamber, or I will have you removed." The words hung in the air like a slap, sending a ripple of shock through the room. Cameras flashed in frantic bursts, capturing Crockett's every movement as she sat perfectly still, her expression calm, unreadable, and dangerously composed. The tension was suffocating. Howell's towering presence loomed from the bench, projecting authority honed over decades, but there was an edge of something else, a flicker of frustration, perhaps even fear. The judge's hand tightened around the gavel, as though force could bend this moment to her will. Across the aisle, aides exchanged glances, sensing the confrontation about to explode. The stakes were more than procedural. This was a battle over power, identity, and dignity itself. Jasmine Crockett did not flinch. Draped in her signature bold colors, she exuded a calm strength that felt almost defiant. Her hands rested lightly on the desk before her, fingers curled in quiet confidence. She blinked once, slowly, like a lioness calculating her next move. In that stillness, she radiated an unspoken truth. She was not intimidated, not today, not ever. The judge's words echoed again in the stunned silence. Removed. The threat was meant to humiliate, to remind Crockett that she was a guest in a system never built for her voice. But the cameras, the relentless eyes of a watching nation, caught every nuance. Howell's clenched jaw, Crockett's unwavering gaze, the storm brewing beneath the surface. A murmur rippled through the gallery, a subtle shift in energy as if everyone could sense history tilting in real time. Howell's composure cracked for just a moment. She adjusted her robes, her tone sharpening. "Do you understand me, Congresswoman?" Crockett's lips curved ever so slightly, a calm smile that carried more power than 1,000 shouted words. She leaned forward, her voice soft yet cutting, preparing to deliver a response that would leave the entire chamber breathless. And then, she spoke. The room was designed to intimidate. High ceilings, echoing marble, and the faint smell of polished wood. Portraits of former judges lined the walls, their stoic gazes staring down at the chamber like silent sentinels of power. The sound of shuffling papers and muted whispers only heightened the tension, as though every person present understood that this hearing was no ordinary proceeding. At the center of it all, Judge Beryl Howell sat with an expression that radiated control. Years of rulings and political maneuvering had shaped her reputation, a stern enforcer of order, unafraid to cut down even the boldest voices. She embodied the establishment, a living symbol of authority that had rarely been challenged, at least not successfully. Across from her, Jasmine Crockett's presence was an undeniable contrast. She leaned back in her chair with measured calm, her sharp gaze unwavering, her brightly colored blazer a visual defiance against the muted tones of the room. Crockett was not just another politician, she was a rising star whose voice carried the weight of lived experience. Her style was fiery, unapologetic, and deeply rooted in the struggles of the communities she represented. That day, she didn't just walk into a hearing, she walked into a battlefield where identity, justice, and power would collide. The stakes were higher than a single exchange of words. Howell's approach symbolized a system where authority had long gone unchallenged, where dignity was often stripped away with a gavel strike. Crockett's presence disrupted that narrative. She represented a new generation of leadership, women of color who refused to bow to intimidation, who carried with them the hopes of those who'd been silenced for far too long. The tension in the room was palpable, charged with more than legal arguments. This was a clash of eras, one woman wielding power granted by a system built to protect itself, the other standing as a beacon for change, refusing to be diminished. Every camera lens seemed to focus on Crockett's face, searching for any flicker of fear, any sign she might falter. There was none. Judge Howell adjusted her glasses, her voice calm but cutting as she prepared to reassert her dominance. But there was an unease in her tone, a subtle hesitation that betrayed the storm she felt brewing. What she didn't know, what she couldn't know, was that Jasmine Crockett wasn't just here to speak. She was here to shatter the script entirely. And Howell was about to face a force of. Judge Beryl Howell's rise to power was nothing short of meteoric. Appointed by presidents and praised by peers, she had spent decades carving out her name as one of Washington's most formidable legal minds. Her courtroom was her kingdom, and she ruled with a sharp intellect and an iron will. Colleagues often described her as unyielding and impeccably prepared, a woman who could recall legal precedents with frightening precision and wield them like weapons. Lawyers entering her chambers knew better than to stumble or stutter. Howell could dismantle a weak argument in seconds, her cool, cutting tone reducing seasoned litigators to nervous whispers. Her reputation was not just built on her mastery of the law, but on her absolute command of decorum. The courtroom was her stage, and she was both director and lead performer. From her early years in the U.S. Attorney's Office to her tenure as Chief Judge of the District Court for the District of Columbia, Howell's career had been a blueprint for institutional power. She had presided over high-profile cases, often making headlines for her bold interpretations of the law and her no-nonsense demeanor. To her supporters, she was a defender of judicial integrity. To her critics, she was an emblem of a judiciary that too often confused authority with justice. Over time, whispers began to surface about Howell's style of leadership. Some called her fearless, but others used sharper words: arrogant, unyielding, even imperious. Her rulings frequently reflected a deep respect for established power structures, and her disdain for those who dared disrupt them was legendary. She was known to lecture attorneys from the bench, sometimes for hours, using her intellect not just to argue but to dominate. These moments were often applauded by establishment figures who admired her poise, but behind closed doors, critics worried about her tendency to overreach, to enforce order not as a neutral arbiter but as a queen defending her throne. It wasn't hard to see why Howell thrived in a system built for people like her. She was polished, sharp, and deeply connected to Washington's power elite. Political insiders, lobbyists, and attorneys alike revered her for her clarity of thought and her ability to keep chaos at bay. But beneath that respect was fear. Howell wasn't just a judge, she was a force of nature, one who could make or break reputations with a single ruling. Over the years, she had built a persona so commanding that few dared to push back against her authority. Yet that authority, for all its brilliance and precision, came with a certain blindness. Howell had grown accustomed to winning. She was used to being the smartest person in the room, to having her authority go unquestioned. Her very posture radiated certainty, a certainty that made her formidable but also vulnerable. When someone believes they are untouchable, they fail to see the storm building on the horizon. That storm was Jasmine Crockett. In Howell's world, figures like Crockett were disruptions, flashes of unpredictability in a carefully controlled ecosystem. Howell had spent years perfecting the art of control, curating her reputation as an intellectual titan. She believed she could intimidate anyone who entered her courtroom, silence any voice with the strike of her gavel. It was a belief that had been reinforced countless times. Few dared to challenge her authority directly, and fewer still had succeeded. But Crockett was unlike any adversary Howell had faced. The Congresswoman's rise was not built on appeasing Washington elites but on defying them. She came from a background that represented the voices Howell's courtroom often overlooked: women of color, working-class families, communities that had long been on the receiving end of the justice system's harshest blows. Crockett wasn't just a lawyer-turned-legislator, she was a fighter forged in the fires of systemic injustice. And she wasn't afraid of Howell's power. This dynamic set the stage for a confrontation that would be more than legal. It would be cultural, symbolic, and deeply personal. Howell represented the old guard, polished and poised, a symbol of a system that had always protected itself. Crockett represented a new wave of leadership that wasn't interested in deference. She was there to expose cracks in the foundation Howell had spent her career fortifying. The irony was palpable. Howell's confidence, the very trait that had made her a legend, was also what made her vulnerable. Her towering reputation, her unshakable presence, these had become armor she believed was impenetrable. But that armor was about to be tested. For all her years on the bench, Howell had never truly faced someone like Jasmine Crockett, a woman who carried not just her own dignity but the aspirations of countless others who had been told to remember their place. And in this chamber, Howell would learn that authority, no matter how carefully constructed, could be dismantled in a single moment of brilliance. Yet in this chamber, her reputation would be tested like never before. Jasmine Crockett's story did not begin in marble chambers or polished halls of power. It began in the heart of Texas, where resilience was not a choice but a way of life. Raised in a working-class family that understood struggle firsthand, Crockett grew up in a world where opportunity was not handed out but fought for tooth and nail. She was the daughter of parents who believed in grit, who taught her that every voice, no matter how small, deserved to be heard. It was in those early years, surrounded by stories of perseverance, that Crockett's spine of steel was forged. She was never one to sit quietly, even as a child. Teachers recall her as a bright spark who questioned everything: rules, systems, even authority. That questioning spirit would define her path. Education was her first battleground, a ladder she climbed one rung at a time. She attended the University of Houston and later Southern University Law Center, stepping into spaces where few women who looked like her were invited. In law school, she didn't just study case law, she lived it, deeply aware of the inequities baked into the justice system. She saw how laws designed to protect often failed those who needed protection most, and that realization lit a fire in her. Her early career wasn't about prestige or wealth, it was about service. Crockett worked as a public defender, standing shoulder to shoulder with the people society too often abandoned. Day after day, she represented those who couldn't afford flashy attorneys, challenging prosecutors and judges who seemed to treat poor, black, and brown defendants as statistics rather than humans. Those years hardened her, not into cynicism, but into resolve. She wasn't afraid of power because she had seen its flaws up close. She understood that justice wasn't a gift, it was something you had to demand. Activism wasn't just part of Crockett's life, it was her life. When movements for social justice erupted across the country, Crockett wasn't content to be a spectator. She marched, she organized, she spoke truth to power in packed rooms where her voice often carried the weight of 1,000 unheard voices. Her advocacy was relentless, and it caught the attention of leaders in Texas politics who saw in her something rare, a fearless black woman who would not bend or break under pressure. Running for office was a natural extension of that fight. Crockett didn't come from political royalty or corporate backing. She came from the streets she served, from neighborhoods where people felt abandoned by a system that claimed to represent them. Her campaign was fueled not by big donors but by the people. Teachers, workers, single parents, who saw themselves in her. She spoke their language because she had lived their lives. When she arrived in Congress, Crockett brought with her the weight of that journey. She wasn't just another politician filling a seat, she was a disruptor, a truth-teller, and a warrior for justice. She carried herself with unapologetic confidence, her bold fashion and sharp rhetoric challenging the sterile norms of Washington decorum. For some, she was a lightning rod. For others, she was a breath of fresh air in a chamber long dominated by men in suits who mistook politeness for power. Crockett understood her presence alone was revolutionary. As a black woman from Texas, she represented not just herself but every person who had been told to wait their turn, or know their place. Her speeches were fiery yet precise, laced with legal expertise and moral clarity. She didn't just speak, she commanded attention. Colleagues learned quickly that she wasn't there to play by their rules, she was there to rewrite them. But Crockett's rise was not without resistance. She faced constant scrutiny, not just for her politics but for daring to be unapologetically herself. Media pundits mocked her style, opponents questioned her legitimacy, and critics tried to paint her as too radical. Yet each attack seemed to sharpen her edge rather than dull it. She knew the game, and she refused to be intimidated by it. Every insult, every attempt to silence her, became fuel. Her legal training made her a formidable force in hearings, but it was her lived experience that gave her words weight. She had stood in courtrooms with defendants who had no one else to fight for them. She had seen the law twisted to protect the powerful and punish the vulnerable. She had grown up hearing stories of injustice not as headlines but as family history. That knowledge made her dangerous to those who thrived on fear. By the time Crockett entered the chamber where Judge Howell presided, she was more than ready. The years of battling systemic injustice had prepared her for this moment. The gavel, the glare, the attempt at intimidation, it was nothing new. Crockett had faced worse, survived more, and emerged stronger every time. She carried the weight of generations on her shoulders, and rather than bow beneath it, she stood taller because of it. To the casual observer, Crockett's calm demeanor in that high-stakes moment might have seemed surprising. But for those who knew her story, it was perfectly in character. Crockett didn't need to raise her voice to command respect. Her very existence in that room was a statement. She was living proof that the system could be challenged, that justice could wear braids, bright colors, and a fierce smile. This was more than a confrontation, it was a clash of eras, a collision between a woman molded by establishment power and another forged by resistance. Crockett was not intimidated by Howell's authority because she had seen behind the curtain. She understood that true power came not from titles or robes but from authenticity and courage. As she sat in that chamber, preparing to respond to Howell's attempt to humiliate her, Crockett exuded an unshakable confidence. She was not just defending herself, she was defending every voice that had been dismissed, every story that had been silenced. Her journey had led her to this exact moment, and she would not waste it. This was the exact battle she was built for. The chamber buzzed with quiet tension, a low hum of anticipation broken only by the occasional shuffle of papers and the clicking of cameras. Judge Beryl Howell, perched high above, radiated authority like a queen on her throne. Her posture was rigid, her gaze unyielding, and her gavel rested in her hand like a weapon she wouldn't hesitate to use. The atmosphere was heavy, the kind of silence that warned something seismic was about to happen. Congresswoman Crockett, Howell's voice cracked like a whip, sharp and deliberate. You will refrain from editorializing. This is not a stage for speeches. Her words were laced with disdain, each syllable dripping condescension. The air shifted, reporters' pens froze mid-scribble. Howell's interruptions were nothing new in this chamber, but today, the edge in her tone was unmistakable. She wasn't just enforcing order, she was flexing power. Crockett, however, didn't so much as blink. She adjusted the microphone in front of her with slow, deliberate grace, her manicured fingers steady as stone. Her chin lifted slightly, not in arrogance but in resolve. Her bright blazer seemed to cut through the muted tones of the courtroom like a streak of lightning, a visual declaration that she would not shrink to fit Howell's expectations. She crossed one leg over the other, leaning back in her chair, exuding a calm that read more like dominance than deference. I'm well aware of where I am, Crockett said softly, her voice low but resonant, carrying across the chamber. There was no tremor, no hesitation. Her words were steady, measured, and tinged with quiet defiance. It was a voice that invited listening, not because it shouted, but because it didn't need to. Howell leaned forward, her gavel striking the block again with a sharp crack. Then act like it, she retorted, her irritation seeping through the polished facade. The tension thickened. The power dynamic Howell had so carefully constructed throughout her career was suddenly being tested by someone who wasn't playing by the unspoken rules of this room. The exchange began to feel like a boxing match. Howell jabbed with procedural corrections and biting remarks, attempting to box Crockett into silence. Crockett parried effortlessly, her tone never rising, her expression never cracking. Each time Howell tried to throw her off balance, Crockett responded with precision, a reminder that she was not just a politician but a seasoned attorney who knew how to dissect arguments as skillfully as she delivered them. The cameras zoomed in on Crockett's face, capturing her subtle smirk when Howell attempted yet another interruption. It wasn't a mocking smile, but one of confidence, a sign she wasn't intimidated. It was the smile of someone who had spent years standing up to systems designed to keep her quiet, someone who had been underestimated too many times to count. The public watching from home saw it too. Social media would later freeze this exact moment, turning it into a symbol, the woman who sat poised under pressure, unshaken by the weight of centuries of authority glaring down at her. Reporters shifted in their seats, sensing a shift in energy. Howell's voice grew sharper, faster, as if she could feel control slipping through her fingers. She slammed the gavel again, the echo ringing through the chamber, but the sound only amplified Crockett's composure. Crockett leaned slightly forward, locking eyes with Howell in a stare that was neither disrespectful nor submissive. It was a stare that said, I see you, I hear you, and I will not be moved. Congresswoman, I will not warn you again, Howell barked, her voice teetering between authority and desperation. The silence that followed was deafening. Even the cameras seemed to pause, zooming in on the stillness of that moment. And then Crockett moved. She placed her hands flat on the table, straightened her back, and tilted her head ever so slightly. Her calm smile widened by a fraction, and she inhaled slowly, like a boxer preparing for the final blow. Every eye in the room turned to her as the tension reached its peak. The energy was electric, thick with anticipation, as if everyone knew something unforgettable was about to happen. Then Crockett leaned forward and, with one sentence, flipped the entire room on its head. The silence was suffocating, the kind that fills every corner of a room and presses against your chest. Crockett leaned into the microphone, her fingers lightly tapping the table, not out of nerves but rhythm, as though she was counting beats before striking the first note in a symphony only she could conduct. Her gaze locked with Judge Howell's, steady, unblinking. Madam Judge, she began softly, the calm in her voice a sharp contrast to Howell's clipped commands. The softness drew the audience in, even the clicking of cameras stopped, as though the press corps collectively held its breath. I was elected by my community to speak for them. And I will not apologize for doing so. A ripple of energy moved through the room. Crockett's tone was not defiant but resolute, a voice so controlled it carried more weight than any raised shout ever could. Howell shifted in her chair, a flicker of irritation flashing in her eyes. This was not how these confrontations usually went. The judge's authority was designed to command submission, but Crockett wasn't flinching. "You may not like my tone," Crockett continued, leaning forward slightly, "but I assure you, it's not nearly as sharp as the tone my constituents hear when they're dismissed, disrespected, or disenfranchised by this system." Her words hung heavy, precise, like an indictment. Every syllable seemed to widen the crack in Howell's armor. The audience reacted instinctively. A low murmur rippled through the gallery, punctuated by a few audible gasps. Reporters leaned forward, pens scratching furiously, sensing history unfolding before them. Crockett paused, letting the weight of her words settle like dust after an explosion. "Congresswoman," Howell interjected sharply, her voice strained, "you will confine yourself to the matter at hand." Crockett's lips curled into a measured smile. "That's exactly what I'm doing." The words were a dagger wrapped in silk, and the silence that followed was electric. Crockett straightened her posture, her voice growing firmer but never losing its composure. "The matter at hand is respect. Respect for the law, respect for this chamber, and respect for the people we serve. And that includes respecting me." Howell blinked, taken aback by the quiet conviction in Crockett's tone. The room itself seemed to shift. What was once Howell's domain now felt like Crockett's stage. "You know," Crockett said, her voice now laced with a pointed calm, "I've spent my entire career defending people who were told they didn't belong in rooms like this. I've watched powerful men and women talk over them, dismiss them, try to crush their dignity with procedure and power plays. And now I'm here. I'm elected. And I'm facing the same thing." The gallery erupted in a quiet stir. A few gasps escaped again, louder this time, followed by a murmur of applause before the bailiffs barked for silence. Cameras flashed as if on cue, capturing Crockett's steel gaze and Howell's tightened jaw. Social media would later immortalize this moment in slow-motion clips, hashtags already being typed in real time by people watching the live stream. Hashtag Crockett clapback, hashtag power shift, hashtag mic drop moment. Crockett took another pause, her voice steady, her pacing intentional, as though she was orchestrating every breath in the room. "I will not be spoken to like a child. I will not be silenced because my presence makes people uncomfortable. I belong here because my district sent me here, and I will not dishonor them by shrinking when I'm told to sit down." The impact of those words was like a punch. Howell gripped her gavel tightly, her knuckles pale, but she didn't strike it. Something in the air told her she was no longer in control. Crockett leaned back for a moment, letting the power of the statement linger, then leaned forward again, closing the distance between them not physically but symbolically. "You tell me to remember my place," Crockett continued, her tone sharp now, her cadence rising with a swell of righteous anger that electrified the chamber. "I know exactly where my place is. My place is standing up for the people who've been ignored for generations. My place is challenging authority when it's wrong. My place is right here, in this seat, in this chamber, with this microphone, speaking truth to power, even if that power is wearing a robe." The room gasped audibly, a sharp collective inhale that broke the tension like glass shattering. Howell froze, her expression hardening into something unreadable, but she didn't interrupt. For the first time, she looked stunned. Crockett's voice softened, but her words cut even deeper. "This system wasn't built for people like me. But I'm here. And every young black girl watching this, every young woman told she's too loud, too bold, too much, they see me here. And I refuse to let them think they don't belong. Not today. Not ever." The crowd erupted again, this time with a wave of applause that Howell's gavel couldn't silence fast enough. "Order. Order in this chamber," Howell barked, her voice cracking as she slammed the gavel repeatedly. But the sound of wood against wood no longer carried authority. It sounded hollow, desperate, like a relic of a time slipping away. Crockett sat back, her calm composure returning, and folded her hands neatly on the table in front of her. The applause faded into whispers and gasps, but all eyes remained fixed on her. She had seized the narrative. She had turned the courtroom into a stage, Howell's authority into a shadow. The judge shifted uncomfortably in her chair, her lips pressed into a thin line. Her jaw twitched as she attempted to regain control, but her voice faltered slightly when she spoke again, and that falter was all it took for the world to see the shift in power. Howell was no longer the unquestioned figure of authority. she was on the defensive. Crockett didn't need to say another word. She had delivered her strike with precision, and its reverberations filled the chamber like thunder after lightning. Reporters scribbled furiously. Cameras captured the moment from every angle, already broadcasting it to millions. Clips of Howell's stunned expression would dominate headlines by nightfall. The air was thick with the realization that something historic had just happened. Crockett sat still, serene, the picture of grace under fire. Howell, on the other hand, shifted again, visibly shaken, her authority cracked for all to see. The silence that followed was deafening, more powerful than any applause, a silence that said everything. The balance of power in that room had shifted. And for the first time in her storied career, Judge Beryl Howell found herself speechless. The clip hit the internet like a lightning bolt, ricocheting across timelines within minutes. A single moment, Jasmine Crockett leaning forward, voice steady, gaze unwavering, declaring, "I know exactly where my place is," became the shot heard around the country. It wasn't just a viral video, it was a cultural event. Newsrooms scrambled to replay the footage on a loop, TikTok edits paired her mic drop moment with dramatic soundtracks, and Twitter, now X, erupted into a frenzy of hashtags. Hashtag Crockett clapback, hashtag the future is here, hashtag powershift. Memes flooded feeds almost instantly. One viral image showed Crockett seated in her vibrant blazer, back straight, eyes sharp, with the caption, "When you bring receipts to a power struggle." Another turned Howell's stunned expression into a reaction meme, her tightened jaw and faltering gavel captioned, "When authority meets actual accountability." Instagram Reels turned the exchange into cinematic slow-motion sequences, paired with voiceovers proclaiming, "This is what courage looks like." Journalists couldn't type fast enough. Headlines painted Crockett as a fearless rising star. Washington Post, Crockett redefines political power with calm but devastating takedown. New York Times, a new voice shakes the halls of justice. Rolling Stone, Jasmine Crockett vs. the Old Guard, the moment that broke the internet. Late-night hosts joined the chorus, playing the clip to roaring applause from their audiences. "That," one quipped, "is how you shut down a gavel without even raising your voice." The laughter and cheers were a stark contrast to the tense chamber where the confrontation had unfolded only hours before. Celebrities began weighing in. Ava DuVernay tweeted, "Jasmine Crockett just made history. That's not just politics, that's art." Viola Davis posted a still shot of Crockett's poised expression with the caption, "This is power." Even sports stars joined in. LeBron James retweeted the video with the comment, "Icon." Period. Within 24 hours, the clip had amassed tens of millions of views, dominating trending pages across every major platform. But the reaction wasn't just celebratory, it was galvanizing. Activists shared the clip as a rallying cry, proof that dignity and intelligence could dismantle entrenched authority. Young women, particularly women of color, flooded comment sections with messages of inspiration. "I've never felt so seen. This is why representation matters." She said what we've all wanted to scream. The viral moment wasn't just a spectacle, it was a movement. On TikTok, creators stitched Crockett's words into motivational edits, overlaid with quotes about justice and resilience. One viral video featured a split screen. On one side, Howell's gavel striking furiously, and on the other, Crockett's calm, cutting line about refusing to shrink. The caption read simply, "When grace is stronger than intimidation." Millions shared it with friends and family, the comments overflowing with pride. Cable news devoted entire segments to dissecting the exchange. Analysts noted Crockett's masterful control of tone, her refusal to be baited, her use of pauses to command the room. "This wasn't just a political statement," one commentator said, "it was a cultural shift. A new generation of leaders is telling the old guard, the era of unchecked authority is over." Meanwhile, Howell's reputation took a hit. Clips of her slamming the gavel while visibly rattled circulated alongside commentary about outdated power dynamics. Critics pointed out that Howell's attempt to assert dominance had backfired spectacularly, casting her as an out-of-touch figure clinging to control in an age of transparency. Editorials began questioning whether Howell's authority, once unquestioned, was now under siege. But amid the noise, Crockett remained composed. In interviews following the hearing, she spoke not with anger but with clarity, emphasizing her commitment to dignity and justice. "I wasn't there to create a viral moment," she told one journalist. I was there to stand up for the people who sent me. If my composure shook someone's confidence, maybe that says more about the system than about me. Her humility only added to her appeal, painting her not as a politician seeking attention, but as a representative refusing to back down. Her popularity skyrocketed overnight. Supporters flooded her campaign website with donations, grassroots organizations praised her as a role model, and political insiders began whispering about her future beyond Congress. Crockett wasn't just a legislator anymore, she was a cultural icon, a symbol of a seismic shift in American politics. Clips of her words echoed across communities, "I know exactly where my place is." That sentence became a rallying cry, printed on t-shirts, posted on protest signs, and turned into phone wallpapers. The image of Crockett leaning forward, eyes locked on Howell, became an emblem of a broader movement demanding accountability and respect from institutions of power. Still, beneath the applause and celebration, there was an undercurrent of tension. Howell had been humiliated, yes, but she was not powerless. She remained a figure deeply embedded in the judiciary, with allies across Washington's entrenched networks. And though Crockett's triumph had inspired millions, it had also rattled those who believed their authority was untouchable. As pundits debated and social media celebrated, whispers began to circulate that Howell wasn't finished. Her pride had been wounded, and the system she represented rarely allowed themselves to be undermined without consequence. The viral moment that had propelled Crockett to cultural stardom had also painted a target on her back. And while the world applauded her courage, something darker was brewing behind the scenes. But Howell wasn't done. Her next move would ignite even more outrage. The storm raged online and in the press for days, but Jasmine Crockett moved through it with the same poise she'd shown in that tense chamber. While pundits dissected her every word and commentators debated the clash, Crockett chose not to escalate. She didn't gloat, she didn't mock, and she didn't let the noise define her. Instead, she carried herself with the quiet confidence of someone who knew the truth was louder than any headline. Her interviews were measured, her words deliberate. "I wasn't there to create a moment," she said softly on a primetime news segment. "I was there to do my job. That's it. I showed up for my people, and I'm going to keep showing up, no matter who tries to intimidate me." That humility only added to the resonance of her message. Crockett made it clear that this wasn't about her ego or reputation, it was about the people who had trusted her to be their voice. She spoke about the communities she represented, families who had been ignored, young people who felt politics wasn't for them, women who had been told to stay quiet. Her story became a mirror for millions watching from home, a reminder that the fight for dignity wasn't just fought in courtrooms or Congress but in workplaces, schools, and homes across America. Crockett leaned into her platform to deliver a universal truth. Power is not about titles or robes, it's about courage. Every time someone tells you to remember your place, she said during a speech in her district, you have the opportunity to remind them that your place is exactly where you are. Because you earned it. Because you belong. Because you will not be erased. The crowd erupted in applause, but there was something deeper in their reaction, a sense of recognition. Crockett wasn't just speaking for herself, she was speaking for every person who had been underestimated or dismissed. Even those outside of politics felt her words reverberate. Teachers replayed clips of her speech in classrooms. Community leaders quoted her at rallies. Social media users created threads about their own experiences of being silenced, inspired by Crockett's refusal to bow under pressure. She had transformed a tense confrontation into a rallying cry for respect and representation, proof that calm courage could be as powerful as any gavel or title. Crockett's message transcended political lines. In interviews, she rejected the idea that her words were about scoring points. "This isn't about partisanship," she said. "This is about humanity. This is about respect. It doesn't matter what side of the aisle you sit on, every person deserves to be heard, every voice deserves dignity." Her refusal to descend into petty politics turned her viral moment into a movement that resonated with people far beyond her district. For many, Crockett became a living reminder of what leadership could look like, unapologetically authentic, fiercely intelligent, and rooted in service. She didn't weaponize her platform for personal gain, she used it to spotlight the voices of those who rarely got airtime. Her calm demeanor under pressure became a lesson in itself, that strength isn't always loud, and that dignity has a power no gavel can silence. The confrontation with Judge Howell would be studied for months, perhaps years, but Crockett never let herself be reduced to a single moment. She reminded her supporters that one viral clip didn't define her, It reflected a lifetime of preparation, of battles fought and lessons learned. "This is not the first time I've been underestimated," she told a packed auditorium of students. "And it won't be the last. But every time someone doubts you, you have a choice: shrink or stand." "I chose to stand." Those words stuck with her audience, especially the young women who lined up to meet her afterward, tears in their eyes as they thanked her for showing them what courage looked like. Crockett's story became more than political drama, it became a blueprint for resilience. And so, her mic drop moment was reframed not as a viral clash but as a symbol of something bigger: the unstoppable strength of representation, the necessity of speaking truth to power, and the reminder that respect is not a privilege handed down by authority, it's a birthright. "This isn't just my fight," Crockett said in one of her final statements on the matter. "It's every person's fight for respect, for equality, for dignity. Because if one of us can be silenced, all of us can. And if one of us finds the courage to stand, all of us can." The room erupted into applause, but the moment wasn't just about sound or spectacle. It was about conviction, a reminder that the fight for justice doesn't always come with raised voices or dramatic gestures. Sometimes it comes with quiet defiance, unwavering confidence, and a single sentence that flips the world on its head. Jasmine Crockett had shown the world that courage wasn't about confrontation for its own sake. It was about standing firm when the weight of history tried to press you down. And in that, she became not just a politician or a representative but a symbol, a beacon for anyone who had ever been told they didn't belong. The chamber that day became more than a battleground. It became a symbol of something far greater, a moment when calm courage shattered the illusion of untouchable authority. Jasmine Crockett's words still echo, not just because they were sharp, but because they were true. She reminded us that dignity is not granted by titles or power. It is inherent, unshakable, and unstoppable when carried with conviction. Her quiet defiance wasn't just a victory for herself, it was a beacon for every person who has been told they don't belong. This is the story of a woman who refused to shrink, and in doing so, inspired millions to stand taller. But her story is not finished, because it was never just hers. It belongs to everyone watching, everyone who has ever been underestimated, dismissed, or silenced. Moments like these are not simply headlines, they are rallying cries, reminders that courage can ripple outward, sparking change in ways we can't always see. So here's your invitation. Be part of that ripple. Share this video with someone who needs to be reminded of their own power. Subscribe if you believe in amplifying voices that challenge injustice and rewrite the rules. Leave a comment, not just to cheer for Crockett, but to share your own story, your own stand against silence. This isn't just a channel, it's a movement, a community that grows stronger every time someone says, "I refuse to be erased." Jasmine Crockett showed us what courage looks like in real time. Now it's our turn to carry that courage forward, to build a future where respect isn't demanded but expected, and justice is not a dream but a daily reality. Because this fight doesn't end here, it begins with all of us.